under arrest for mischief over. Okay, don't play these games for your videos, okay? You can just stand up.
He's being detained pending a bail decision from the judge in Lethbridge Provincial Criminal Court. That decision is coming out on Wednesday. Once we have that decision, we will know how much longer, if at all, he will be detained. The submissions by myself and Mr. Haggerty, the criminal defense lawyer, is that he should be released, that he should not be detained. We will see if those fell on deaf ears or if those were successful, and we hope that he will be released on Wednesday. If not, I understand currently that he's being held in solitary confinement because he is unvaccinated, and that is another issue that we are trying to address as immediately as possible.
Adam Sus here for Rebel News with an update on yet another arrest of Pastor Artur Pawlowski. This is the 5th time he has been arrested and the 3rd time that he has been taken into custody, some of these being longer stays at the Remand Centre. Sarah Miller here, the legal counsel provided to Pastor Artur at no cost to him, thanks to your donations at saveartur.com. I just wanted to recap for people out there who maybe don't understand what is happening here, and correct me if I'm wrong. I want you to be as transparent as possible. I understand that there were guidelines in place, there were court orders and restrictions, but I want to really understand what Pastor Artur Pawlowski has done to currently be stuck in jail and to have experienced such ongoing, what I would call, I'm not putting these words in your mouth, but persecution by state authorities. Effectively, my understanding is that he opened his church when he wasn't necessarily supposed to. He continued feeding the homeless who didn't stop being hungry because COVID-19 kicked in. And he's attended and preached at, effectively exercising his religious freedoms, a number of peaceful protests. Is there something else that I'm missing?
Yeah, so if we look back to the history of when Artur was first detained, the first detention arose from him conducting church services on a Saturday like he does. Mm-hmm. So that was the first detention. The second detention also related to conducting church services outdoors. And now, then a third detention resulted in, and these were relatively brief. The first one was 3 days. The next one was nearly 24 hours. The next one was, about 14 hours or so. So the third one was attending a peaceful protest. And now he's attended a peaceful protest, or actually not even at the protest, but spoke to protesters and exercised his right to expression, his right to assembly, and has been arrested on each occasion and spent time in Calgary Remand in arrest processing in the custody of police because he's exercising either his right to religion or his right to expression and assembly.
Now, I want to get to the latest arrest and the charges, but I really quickly, and I didn't brief you on this, so if you don't have an answer, that's okay, but is there any precedent for someone experiencing, other than maybe like a drug lord or a pimp or something, experiencing this level of ongoing ticketed harassment and persecution for carrying out religious services in Alberta and Calgary and Canada even?
Well, Artur Pawlowski is the example of that. He's been sought by police for like a decade now with respect to bylaw tickets. He's got a whole series of court appearances with respect to whether or not he was allowed to feed the homeless or have his church or have amplification of his sermons in parks in Calgary. So that has been constant. Artur Pawlowski is not new to this, but to amp this up into what was originally provincial offenses under the Public Health Act, to change it into civil contempt and then criminal contempt, which essentially is just duplicating the legislative procedure and what Parliament has said, if you breach this is what we think is a reasonable sentence. And the court changed that by issuing Justice Rook's order and duplicated, you cannot breach this legislation, but now instead of doing what Parliament thought was reasonable, we're going to make a whole other process for you. Expose him to criminal liability, expose him to criminal charges. It's not wholly unheard of. We see this with large protests regularly. We see it in the United States. We see it in Canada. We see it in Canada in British Columbia. I mean, the largest amount of people who have ever been arrested and prosecuted are from the Fairy Creek protests, right? Over 100 people who have been prosecuted by that, and multiple prosecutions that arise from that. So it's not wholly unheard of, but it's certainly, in my estimation, improper.
Well, and I think that this ties in nicely. Some of those mass protests you're talking about are blocking of infrastructure projects, blocking of highways, blocking of railroads, serious sort of and self-evident infrastructure blockages. In the latest arrest, amidst the charges, I believe there's $5,000 mischief. But the most concerning part here ultimately is that there's some traffic and regulations acts, infrastructure protection element incorporated, and that's what he's being charged on. Is that right?
Yeah, so his current charges that he's facing right now, the first count is a offense under the Critical Infrastructure Defence Act. That's an act that the provincial government of Alberta implemented in response to protests to prevent protesters from being able to interfere with critical infrastructure. Obviously, Artur Pawlowski has not interfered with critical infrastructure, but there's a section under that act that says, well, if you encourage somebody else to do it, then that's an offense under this act as well. That can attract up to 6 months jail and a $10,000 fine, but the minimum fine is $1,000. So we don't know what the Crown is seeking on that. What they did say with respect to just the charges, the three, is that they are seeking to incarcerate Mr. Pawlowski if he's found guilty of these offenses. The second charge is mischief over $5,000, and they don't assert that he's actually caused the mischief with respect to the highway system, but that he abetted the protesters in causing the mischief. The Crown in the bail proceedings essentially equated incitement to abetting. They didn't provide case law for that. I'm not aware of case law that supports that. This was, in my estimation, going to be a pretty novel prosecution on behalf of the Crown. We'll see if comments that show support for protesters can amount to mischief or abetting mischief. Obviously, we're going to be defending that on every ground possible, and would argue almost definitely the charter implications of that with respect to freedom of expression. The third charge is breach of release order, and to be honest, I'm not sure if that's a release order related to the last criminal charges that were laid with respect to the peaceful protest, or if that's some other order that they're referring to. I don't have that clarity at this point.
So we've talked about with some of the other pastors, Pastor Artur, amidst the other pastors in the province, we've seen this sort of arbitrary shifting from criminal code to health act prosecution. They seem to be sort of jumping all over the place. I don't know if it's a question of ineptitude or just trying to find somewhere they can get something to stick. But the thing that's really baffling to me, and I'm sure to many out there, is that the actual people blockading at Coots have not been charged under this act. But a pastor now who showed up and preached, exercising his religious freedoms for an hour or two, and then left, has been charged for effectively abetting the people blocking it. How do you not charge? I mean, I'm not endorsing charging these people, obviously, but is there not a disconnect there?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's going to be part of the defense we run, I'm sure, is to at least flesh out, well, what is this? And we don't know what's going to happen with the rest of the truckers at Coots. We don't know how the prosecution is going to deal with them, and we don't represent any truckers at Coots, or I should say I don't represent any truckers at Coots. And so I don't know who's getting charged, what they're being charged with, or what the prosecution will come up with in the meantime with respect to that. But it is an interesting legal question as to, can you abet a criminal action when that criminal action isn't prosecuted or conducted? And do they have to prove, does the Crown have to prove that some sort of criminal mischief actually occurred, and how do they do that without bringing charges against those who were supposedly doing the mischief? And
to the best of my understanding, I think looking at the law, you can make an argument about the legality of what's happening down there, but it's not as though there's an active injunction that Pastor Artur Pawlowski went out of his way to go against. He went down there, preached, and left. Ultimately, for those people out there, Pastor Artur is now once again at the Remand Centre behind bars. We have heard reports that again it can shift from day to day, but his treatment has been less than optimal, certainly. He's enduring some duress according to his family. How long is he in there for? When will there be a resolution for this? What's on the horizon for Pastor Artur Pawlowski?
Yeah, so just for clarification, I don't have any specific detail right now about how Artur is being treated, what those circumstances are within the jail. So as you say, that's based on what the family has heard from him or wherever they're getting their information. I don't have that information. I have left multiple messages, as this will sound familiar to some of your viewers who've been following the story. I've left multiple messages. No, but I don't know if my messages are getting through or not. I'm not getting a phone call back from the Remand Centre at this point. With respect to what is currently his situation, he's being detained pending a bail decision from the judge in Lethbridge Provincial Criminal Court. That decision is coming out on Wednesday. Once we have that decision, we will know how much longer, if at all, he will be detained. The submissions by myself and Mr. Haggerty, the criminal defense lawyer, is that he should be released, that he should not be detained. We will see if those fell on deaf ears or if those were successful, and we hope that he will be released on Wednesday. If not, I understand currently that he's being held in solitary confinement because he is unvaccinated, and that is another issue that we are trying to address as immediately as possible.
I want to thank you so much for this update. For everyone out there, there's so much going on in the world right now. There are blockades. In many provinces, mandates are coming to an end. But I want to remind you that there is a pastor behind bars right now in Alberta. Do not be entirely distracted by everything else going on in the world. Keep an eye on this story. Don't let Pastor Artur Pawlowski be forgotten. If you want to help Sarah continue to work for Pastor Artur Pawlowski as his legal counsel to keep him out of jail and keep him with the best representation he can possibly have, you can do so by chipping in at saveartur.com. Again, Sarah, thank you so much for the update. For everyone out there, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. For Rebel News, I'm Adam Sos.
Hello friends, this is Pastor Artur Pawlowski. If you're watching this video right now, that means I am in jail and they successfully arrested me. I don't know what is going to happen to me. I don't know what is happening outside, but I hope that you are still with me and you're willing to support me to get me out of this terrible, hard situation. Please pray for me. Please support if you can, and may God bless you for everything you're doing to help me to get out there and be the light in this dark world.